Hello dear friends of Inside Opera and Classical Music, and welcome to a new video. What's more beautiful than listening to good music, maybe at the piano and maybe a nice prelude by Chopin? The prelude we are talking about today is the prelude in E minor, opus 28, number 4. This prelude was called Suffocation by the German conductor and pianist Hans von Bülow, due to his sense of anxiety and despair. It's a prelude famous for its masterful performances by the greatest pianists in the world, but not only. In fact, it is also particularly performed by young piano students, who often come across their studies in this wonderful piano piece, which is often included in collections considered easy for piano. A way to bring students closer to the composition of a certain musical depth, without exaggerating the difficulty. Yet this prelude, seemingly so simple, is not really so, and also its story deserves a proper narrative. But before, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. What are you waiting for? It's free, so you help the channel grow and make it known more and more to music lovers. We were talking about the history of this prelude. First of all, it must be said that Chopin's preludes were not born with an already established destination, but they were short passages, an arpeggio, an interval, a melodic line, a fragment. Those came to him as inspirations, perhaps while improvising on the piano, and that he noted with the precise intent to develop all later. Ideas that slowly took shape aside until they became the wonderful preludes we know. Chopin was a young man with poor health. As early as 1837, when he was 27 years old, doctors had advised him on a winter stay in a warm place, perhaps in the south, precisely because the signs of the disease were beginning to become apparent. There was a lot of talk about Chopin's disease, and probably from the symptoms it was tuberculosis, a fatal disease that led to his death. In 1837, therefore, there were signs of the disease, but they were not yet alarming signs, but they were there. By the end of June 1848, Chopin and George Sand had begun a love affair, and it is with her that he decides to leave at the end of the summer to the island of Majorca, hoping that moving away from rainy Paris his condition could improve. The problem? The trip and staying there required an expense that Chopin at that time could not face. It was at that moment that the publisher Camille Pleyel came to his aid. Having probably already had the opportunity to see the outlines of those preludes, he made him an indispensable proposal. He commissioned him a collection of these pieces for the sum of 2,000 francs and would have anticipated 500, so that he could face the warm journey he really needed. Chopin was hesitant. He did not usually receive money without having already finished the job. Probably between the necessity and the fact that he already had a lot of almost ready material, he accepted the offer. He left with Sand and their children, Maurice and Solange, for a long journey that lasted until the spring of 1839. And it was at that time, between coughs, with the continued assistance of Sand, that Chopin created several compositions, including the 24 preludes, opus 28. These preludes, although being collected together, perhaps recalling the Well-Tempered Clavier by Johann Sebastian Bach, composer whom Chopin admired so much. They are not actually an organic work, but more a collection of small independent compositions, each with an emotional sphere and its own distinct characteristics. Prelude number 4, which is part of this collection, certainly dates back to this period in Majorca, since in the Geneva manuscript there is a draft of the Mazurka in E minor, opus 41, number 1, which also contains a part of this prelude number 4. Many scholars have associated and compared these two compositions, and thanks to the manuscript, we can confirm the place and the period of composition, since it is reported Palma, November 28th, understood to be 1848. Upon Chopin's return from Majorca, the preludes were immediately published. Listening to this beautiful composition, it immediately strikes the alternation of two notes, repeated several times on the same interval. This creates a melody in the right hand that is predominant, which tends to dominate the accompaniment of the left hand. This is a characteristic that we can also find in other preludes, as in the numbers 1, 5 and 12, but the difference is that here the two notes do not move. It is a repetition of B, C, B, C, which creates that yearning, that nostalgic aura that characterizes the whole prelude. It is as if they were sighs, one after the other. The structure, this insistence on the two notes, requires a more consistent harmonic support. In fact, we find a series of repeated chords, a series of eighth notes that are repeated regularly, repeated chords that move slowly descending. The prelude is not long. Indeed, it is particularly short. It is as if it is a splendid miniature, a cameo, which in a couple of minutes encloses a yearning that is impossible not to perceive. It proves that a piece doesn't have to be long to be great. It is as if in those 2 minutes you could penetrate the composer's soul and perceive its essence, feel, and almost excruciating suffering. Franz Liszt, after listening to these preludes, wrote: Chopin's preludes are in a category by themselves. They are not solely, as their title would lead one to suppose, items intended to be played by way of introduction to other items. They are poetic preludes similar to those of the great poet Lamartine, which bathe the soul in golden dreams and lift it to the realms of the ideal. Therefore, the difficulty for a young piano student who faces this score is not so much a technical difficulty, but an interpretative difficulty. It is a prelude where every note is imbued with emotions that must be interpreted by the performer to be able to revive them. He must find them inside himself and revive them on the keyboard to recreate that sense of suffocation, as it is called. If you don't like suffocation, from a testimony by Solange, the daughter of Georges Sand, we know that Sand called this work "What tears are shed from the depths of the damp monastery." Which one do you prefer? And finally, here is a curiosity for you. This prelude is not only loved by pianists and piano lovers, but was much loved by Chopin himself, so much so that he asked for it to be performed at his funeral. And so it was. This prelude was performed on the organ by Louis Lefebure-Willy on October 30th, 1849, in the Church de la Madeleine, together with other compositions, with a large crowd that came to pay homage with a final greeting to the great composer, missed so early, at only 39 years old. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, leave a like and a comment, and if you haven't done so yet, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next appointments.